Well, Senator Tina Smith is the United States Senator from the great state of Minnesota. Senator Smith, welcome back to the Climate Pod.
Well, thanks, Brock. It's great to be back with both of you. Hi, Ty.
Well, it's so great to have you on because we were so excited for this week's news. But let's take a step back. Less than 2 weeks ago, Senator Manchin seemed like it was going to refuse to agree to climate provisions in President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. It seemed like our best chance of investing in climate solutions at a federal level had passed. Then on Wednesday, we hear that Senators Schumer and Manchin have agreed on a new bill, the Inflation Recovery Act, which would spend $370 billion on climate and energy solutions. So what happened over the last 2 weeks that led to this agreement?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but all I can tell you is that I was as stunned as everyone else, and I could not be happier. Of course, one of the things that Senator Manchin talked about was his worries about inflation and rising prices. And that is one of the reasons that advancing this bill and the climate provisions of this bill makes so much sense, because of what it will do to lower energy prices for Americans across the board. There are so many great things in this package, and I cannot wait to get this done.
So when do you hear that this agreement is in place, and what's your reaction?
Well, I was as I was very surprised when I first heard about it. I think it was Monday afternoon. I was on my way to preside over the United States Senate, and it was so surprising that I had to double check with the Leader Schumer's staff to make sure that it was real. I have to tell you a funny story. As I was presiding and sitting on the dais of the Senate, my phone starts ringing, and you're not supposed to answer the phone when you're presiding over the United States Senate. But on the second time the call came, I realized it had to be Senator Schumer. So I answered the phone and I said, "Chuck, I can't talk right now. I'm presiding over the Senate." And he tells me, he said, "Tina, this is a big deal. We've got 40% emissions reductions." And I said, "Congratulations, I'll call you back." So.
And, this is after years of work. You've put years into this. Your staff has put years into it. So many incredible staffers and people outside of government have been working so hard to make sure that we had the biggest spending bill in the history of U.S. climate action. So what does it mean to you personally? I have to imagine this is why you are in public service. So take me to that moment. Like, what is that like after years of work to have gotten to this agreement?
Well, I will admit to being a proud member of the Never Give Up caucus in the United States Senate. You're absolutely right. One of the most important values to me when I came to the Senate was to take action on our climate emergency. And we have been working on it. I mean, some people have been working on this in the Senate for decades, and I've been working on it since when I was lieutenant governor, and before that in Minnesota. So to be able to realize that we're on the cusp of taking steps that will get us well along the path towards reaching our goal of 50% reductions by 2030. And of course, our overall goal of getting to net zero no later than 2050 it feels very powerful. And the overall strategies that we have in this bill are also very broad-based. They are about cleaning up our power sector as well as our industrial sector. It is about making improvements to our transportation sector. It is about addressing the fossil fuel pollution for the people and the places that have been most dramatically injured by fossil fuel pollution. I am very happy with where this legislation looks like it's going to end up. It's not done yet. We have a busy 10 days or so before it's finished, but I can see it on the horizon.
Well, I know it's not finalized, but I do want to talk about what is currently in the bill. How does the Inflation Recovery Act help America reduce carbon emissions?
Well, it does it in a variety of ways. Fundamentally, what's going on in this country right now, I believe, is that we are on a path towards moving away from fossil fuels and moving towards clean power. The problem we have is that we're not moving fast enough down that path. We cannot wait for progress. We have to incentivize progress. And that's what this bill does, both on the supply side for clean energy and also on the demand side for clean energy, it gives a giant energy boost to what's happening automatically in the market. And it does that in a couple of ways. Well, actually, 7 or 8 ways if you want to get into it. It provides tax credits to build out and expand clean power sources. It supports consumers who want to transition to electric appliances and to clean cars. It supports rural electric co-ops that want to transition away from coal-fired plants to cleaner renewable sources. It supports building out the transmission system so those clean power sources can get into the grid and can contribute to the overall reliability and resilience of the grid. There are some early statistical modeling that's been done that shows that this legislation looks like it could probably save American consumers somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,800 a year just in energy savings. And with everyone talking so much about inflation, as we should be, energy costs are over 40% of the total basket of inflationary pressures the consumers are facing. So that gives you an idea of what a big deal this is if you care about prices.
Yeah, and I know the bill also helps spur domestic manufacturing of clean energy technologies. How's it going to do that?
Well, that's really, really true. As we want to spur demand for things like wind and solar power, and also for electric appliances and electric vehicles, we also want to make sure that we are enhancing our national security by making sure that those components, whether it is solar panels or batteries, are being made in the United States. So the bill accomplishes that by providing additional tax credits and supports to bring that manufacturing back to the United States. So that's going to be good for prices in the long run, but it also is going to be good for our national security and our energy independence.
And we know that environmental justice was critical to President Biden's agenda. He promised 40% of all spending would go to frontline communities. What does this bill do to address environmental justice?
This is a huge issue because Black and brown communities, poor communities have been disproportionately injured by fossil fuel pollution. Levels of asthma in poor communities, Black and brown communities that are inevitably located near freeways are much higher, just to give you one example. So here's what this bill does. It provides billions of dollars in support for communities to be able to take action to address that climate pollution in their communities. It provides support so that we have great projects like I have in one of my favorite communities in Minneapolis, in North Minneapolis, for neighborhood solar to be installed so that folks in these communities can take advantage of and can own their own power in a way that literally is empowering to them and helps them to lower prices. And another thing that it does, which is really great, is it provides and targets tax credits and tax rebates to help lower income folks be able to afford transitioning away from a gas hot water heater or a gas heating system to be able to afford to buy heat pumps or electric appliances, which are going to save them money in the long run, but it also is going to improve their indoor air quality as well. These billions of dollars are a direct down payment on the promise of addressing the disproportionate impacts of fossil fuel. I mean, I could go on. I want to just mention one other thing. In one of the major contributors to air pollution for people living near freeways are the big diesel trucks and post office vehicles that spew out fossil fuel pollution. There's money in this bill specifically to transition those vehicles away from fossil fuel into electric.
When there is this kind of investment by the federal government in tax incentives and spending, this can unlock so much private capital. The really exciting thing is it's not just about this investment, it's also about what follows. What do you expect might happen when it comes to private investments in the American economy around clean energy now that this agreement could be signed into law?
Well, Brock, that's such a great point because this is truly a public-private partnership. And what we're doing with this legislation is we are aligning our federal incentives with the goals that we want to achieve in terms of where investment is going. Investment is increasingly flowing towards renewables and clean. The big investors understand that that's the direction the market is going. This sends them a clear signal about where to invest their dollars, and not only where in terms of fossil fuel versus clean power, but also where in the world to invest those dollars. And that is all going to benefit American air quality, and it will continue to put us on the cutting edge of the research and innovation that is happening at a galloping pace when it comes to clean energy. I'm thinking about battery storage, but I'm also thinking about innovations around carbon capture and green hydrogen, and a whole slew of other technologies that are unlocking potential.
Secretary Kerry can go to COP27 this year if this bill passes and is signed into law, with the largest climate bill in U.S. history. We saw this week news out of Germany that they might be investing $180 billion to improve energy efficiency and accelerate the clean energy transition as they are responding to what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. From a global standpoint, what do you think what could this mean as the United States, historically the largest emitter of carbon emissions, could actually put together the largest spending bill in its history? What could it mean for the entire global community?
Well, you're absolutely right. We have been historically the largest emitter of fossil fuel pollution, though of course China is a really, really significant player. Some people will argue, well, why should we take these steps when we still have major fossil fuel pollution happening from countries like China? My argument back is that it is our leadership that is going to incentivize and going to spur the kinds of transitions that we want to see everywhere in the world. And when you think particularly about our economic competition with China, they have been plowing resources into innovation around wind and solar as just one example, around battery storage as just one example. So in that competition, we are going to be in a much stronger place than we might have been otherwise. And it gives us both the economic clout and the moral authority to call on the rest of the world to follow us. So we are actually leading in this and not following, which I think is very powerful.
So let's talk about the bill itself. Of course, there's this agreement. It has not passed through the Senate, has not been signed into law. We have to get this over the finish line. What happens now with this bill?
Yes. So in the Senate, we are bound by all sorts of rules, many of which I'd like to change, but that's a whole other story. But we have the capacity. Most pieces of legislation in the Senate are unable to pass unless you have 60 votes. So here's the reality. I'm not being partisan about this. I'm just stating the facts that we don't appear to have a single Republican vote to move this forward. Luckily, we have a special budget process in the Senate that's called the reconciliation process that allows us to pass budget bills with a simple majority. So that's the process that we're going to move into. It's starting right now. And I think what it will mean is that we will be able to finally finish this. I'm hopeful by maybe the very end of next week or sometime over the weekend, depending on how long that process takes. It's an arcane and complicated and painful process, but it will certainly be worth it in order to get this accomplished.
We have a huge election coming up in November. What do you think, if this bill passes, what could that mean for the upcoming midterm elections?
Well, I think it's going to mean several things. One, we know that that people's concerns around prices and inflation are real and deserve to be addressed. This bill goes at that directly by contributing to lowering energy prices, both at the pump and on their utility bills that Americans are going to be able to see and feel. And I think that's really important. I also think that it shows that we are capable of making significant progress on the issues that Americans care about. And that is extremely important. And then the third thing I'll say is there are many, many millions of Americans who are deeply concerned about the climate crisis and want to know who is on their side when it comes to taking action to address that. And they have their answer when they see what we will be able to accomplish with this legislation. And then the last thing, we haven't really talked about this so much so far, but the bill is very, very favorable to good paying high wage, good benefit jobs and careers. There are provisions that ensure that you can have a race to the bottom in terms of wages when it comes to this legislation. I think it will also support strong union jobs in this country. And that is a very, very powerful thing and an important thing as we think about motivating folks to come out and vote.
I mean, it shows that 2020 meant so much. I mean, it's the difference. Even thinking about back to the Georgia Senate elections. I mean, we wouldn't have a bill like this if people didn't turn out to vote, if progressives didn't build political power. I'm curious what you think would happen with federal climate policy if this passes and Democrats were able to maintain or expand the majority in the House and even add more seats in Senate, which is very much on the table. If Democrats have more legislative power next year, could you see even stronger rules or incentives happen in a future federal climate bill?
I think that that's absolutely right. I don't want to downplay the strength of this legislation, but there will, of course, be more work to do. I can't help but mention that my effort to pass the Clean Electricity Payment Plan to jumpstart the efforts to clean up the power sector of our economy. That bill, I would love to see that bill pass, and it would be so complementary of the tax credits that are in this bill. To those things can work hand in glove. That was how this was originally designed. The Clean Electricity Plan is not there right now, but if we had more votes in the Senate, it could conceivably be included as we think about what work we have next to do.
Do you think Democrats should be messaging around that to make sure the same climate community that really showed up in 2020 will be there at the midterms?
I think that we should not shy away from talking about this strong progress, as well as there being more work to do on climate. You're absolutely right. And in a way, the focus that people have on prices and lowering costs, I think, gives us a way to connect with people on something that they really care so much about right now, which is lowering prices. There are many, many reasons to care about addressing our climate crisis. I mean, there is an existential threat to our future, I believe, by carbon emissions, and reducing carbon emissions is addressing that. I think about my grandchildren in home in Minnesota and how I want them to know what snow looks like. I mean, that literally is on the line as we think about the steps that we need to take. And it is wonderful to have a moment of optimism and progress and forward motion. It gives me I keep making the energy pun. It gives me a ton of energy.
Could be a transformative, historic moment. And I think we have to celebrate that and appreciate, again, all the incredible people that put the work in to get this done. You mentioned the clean electricity standard. We obviously didn't get that in this bill. Or are there other things that you would like to see addressed head on in future climate legislation? If progressives have more power in the Senate and House next year?
Well, one thing I'll mention is that two things. One, I really think there's always going to be more to do when it comes to electrifying our transportation system. This bill makes important steps in that direction, but I think that there will be more to do. We haven't talked very much about the provisions in this bill around supporting climate-smart agriculture and supporting rural communities as they transition to clean power. There are some very strong things here to help farmers do even more when it comes to their conservation practices, which allows them to do farming in ways that sequesters carbon in the soil, which is good for farming practices and also good for addressing the climate crisis. But there's more that we could do there. And so those are two examples of things I think we can focus on more.
Well, it's really nice to talk to you about this bit of good news, because we really haven't had much good news out of Washington this year, with the terrible Supreme Court decisions, the attempt at basically revising the facts of what took place on January 6th, and this whole emotional roller coaster that has been President Biden's climate agenda. What is your message to Americans who are losing faith in America's ability to really deliver upon its promise of a democratic, just, and sustainable society?
Well, we are living through a time of great chaos and upheaval. We are emerging from the worst global pandemic in the last 100 years. And in the midst of this, it is hard to see where the progress is, but I ask people to see that there is being progress made. We have, in this climate legislation, we are making the most significant strides forward that we have ever made in our history. I also want to point out that in the President Biden's Infrastructure and Jobs Act, we made a significant investment in cleaner water, better, safer roads and bridges, and in some of the infrastructure that we need to support electrifying our transportation system. And so progress doesn't always happen on a straight line, as Dr. King says. I mean, the arc of progress is not always straight, but we are moving forward, and it takes work every single day. It's not like a one and done thing. You have to keep on working on it. And that's what I'm committed to do, but we all need to do it together.
Well, Senator Smith, we could not be more excited about this week's news. You've been one of the truly incredible climate warriors in the United States Senate, and the fact that you and your staff have done so much work, again, with all the other incredible staffers and members of Congress who have been working for years and decades to get this done. It means so much to us. Goodness, I hope we get this across the line. I know your staff is going to have to put in a ton of work between now and then, but I hope that they throw an incredible party if this gets across the line and is signed into law. Is there a Minnesota party item? Like, is there a dish that sort of defines Minnesota party to you? I'm trying to think. We're in Indiana. I don't know what that would be for us. Maybe pork tenderloin. Pork tenderloin in Indiana would be like the go-to party. What would be in Minnesota?
I don't know. You know what? I keep thinking of two things. One is in Minnesota, we have something called hot dish, which is sort of like a casserole, but it's a little bit different. So maybe we'll have a big hot dish party, or maybe what we'll do is we'll go to the Minnesota State Fair and we'll celebrate all the incredible things that we can eat on a stick. We'll enjoy those things as we celebrate this passage. And I do just want to say my amazing staff and the staff of other senators who have worked so hard and literally never gave up in order to get this done. There will be a few more sleepless nights for all of us as we get this over the line, but their knowledge and their determination and their commitment to this issue is really inspiring.
It is truly inspiring. Senator Smith, thank you again for joining us again on the Climate Pod.
Thank you. Thank you, Brock. Thanks, Ty.